Hello, hello. Welcome back to Are You Ready for Your Inspection podcast. If you are listening to this, thank you very much. I've had a few people message me to say that they've loved the podcast, short and sweet and golden nuggets, which I don't mind. Today I am recording this and I'm hoping that the internet is going to be okay because the weather out there in Hampshire is not looking so great. So I'm hoping I can get this going. But I have a very special guest with me today. So my very special guest, please explain who you are, what you do, and let's have a chat.
Okay, so my name is Cathy Agozzino. I work for a company called Grande UK, and I am their new apprentice and learner coordinator. So I am looking after all of our apprentices that are in our business.
Okay, and how many do you know that you've got? Would you know?
Over 200, about 256 at the moment.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. So why are we having this a podcast then, Cathy? Let's have a chat because this is a little bit like, okay, yeah, let's chat. So talk to me.
So I approached you, Vanessa, because I love listening to your podcast and gaining some information about what we can do to support our apprentices. And I wondered if you had a podcast that was dedicated to apprentices. So I reached out to you and said, can we do something? And I have a lot of questions for you. So, my lovely, if that's okay.
Here we go.
So,
I don't know the answers. That's the bit that really.
I'm sure you will do. They're very general questions. So, in terms of sort of an inspection, what sort of questions might an inspector ask an apprentice, and what key things would they be looking for in their answers?
Okay, so the first thing would be going down the route of safeguarding. Because usually the apprentices are the new members of the team that come in, and your inspector will find out who the new members of the teams are, which is really scary because actually sometimes the new members of the team are always the most anxious ones.
Yeah.
So my feeling is what they know about safeguarding, what it means, who is their designated safeguarding lead, who would they go to if they've got a concern about a staff member? Do they understand what prevent duty means? And that includes how do they promote it, like the British values. Also, they would probably give them some scenarios as well to see how well that they do understand what safeguarding is. And it's just not, when it's like drilled in and it's rotated and you just do it all the time. And saying, because it's drilled into you, but it's actually, do they understand what that means? Another thing would be to find out if they're a key person, and quite often they are a key person, which is great, whether it's, they've only got one because they're being mentored by somebody in the room, but what they understand, what the apprentice understands about their key child, what are their interests, what's the intention, what's the next steps, what are they going to do, put plans in place to ensure that that child gets those next steps. Mm-hmm. They would also probably ask them, and obviously not all in one center, the conversation with them, they would dip in and out between different apprentices, but
how they would apprentice, would they sort of ask maybe a couple of questions and then go off a little bit and then come back with maybe a couple more questions?
They would. And also they would actually, if your apprentice doesn't know, I always say to the inspector, I actually do know the answer, but I'm a little bit nervous, I'm a little bit anxious. Mm-hmm. Can I come back to you? And the inspector should go, yeah, absolutely fine. Go and tell me where you think it is and then come back to me. But my bit of advice there would be to actually do go back to that inspector. Don't just say it and not do it, because that really actually helps that apprentice feel that they know where they're going, they know what the answer is, and they're not afraid to actually go and find the inspector.
So it's okay for an apprentice to sort of ask questions of the inspector then, and what sort of questions might they ask that would develop them, would help their development?
Yeah. They'd also ask if they've got a mentor as well, or what the induction process was like, because they usually, you know, a newer member of the team. What their targets were at their last supervision is one. And actually making sure that's when the inspector would then triangulate and go and make sure that the targets were smart. So they're, and actually making sure that the apprentice does know that actually what their target is, even if it's just one, and what they're doing and what support they've got to get it. So they're some of the questions that they would probably be asked, I would say, from an inspector, or I would ask anyway.
And what sort of level of understanding would the inspector expect an apprentice to have?
Well, they'd obviously understand that they're an apprentice, but you know, you get new apprentices, and then you get apprentices that are just about to go and enter endpoint assessment and really ready to rock and roll, aren't they? So you've got those two bits, but it's, you know, the inspector will look at the apprentice and see what they know. But like I said to you, going back to their first questions, if they don't know it, get them to find out for it and then go back to the inspector, because that also adds a little bit of understanding that they know where to find that information out rather than just leaving it. So it does depend on which stage that apprentice is, whether they're new, they're just come out from school, just come out of college, or wherever it is, to whether they're actually entering EPA and they're actually got a little bit more knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, so if they're a brand new apprentice, and that say they had just come straight out of school, what could the setting do to sort of prepare them for an inspection? Because I'm guessing, you know, as a manager, it's quite scary, an inspection, isn't it? So for a new apprentice to sort of be in amongst that environment where everybody's a little bit panicked.
I would say that every apprentice, really good practice is for that apprentice is to have a mentor. Okay, because I really truly believe you can't just rely on a manager at this stage, and the manager's not necessarily in the room. So actually the apprentice really should have a clear understanding who their mentor is, and actually maybe bring that mentor in and introduce them to the inspector, and so that the mentor can actually be that in-between go-to person. Because it's hard. I mean, safeguarding is the one question that they need to know. There's no doubt about it. They need to know all of those questions, all of those answers to those questions. But actually, for having a mentor actually proves that you've got a really good induction and really good training program and procedure in for those apprentices, and not everybody has that. So one of the things I would recommend is making sure that every apprentice has a mentor and they know who that mentor is.
Great advice. Yeah. So are there any common sort of myths or mistakes made regarding apprentices and their role during an inspection?
I think there's probably a misguided, and I'm taking it from apprentices, is that they may think that they are just only apprentice. And that's not the case. That's not the case. And actually, we've got an apprentice here in our studio who does all of our digital marketing. And Anthony, he was an apprentice and now completed his qualification. But actually, we say to them, you are an integral part of the team. If you didn't do what you were doing, we couldn't do what we needed to do. And I think sometimes, it's not necessarily all of the time, but I've seen some things where apprentices are just an apprentice and feel that they're just an apprentice. And that shouldn't be the case, because they are still doing the same job. They're still doing the same role. They still do the same hours. Okay, some of it might be off the job hours, but all of those things are really important, and we have to value our apprentices, and not
really important to make them feel seen.
And it's not cheap labour. That's the bit. We need to be making sure these are the ones that we are home growing in our setting to have our own ethos, to understand our ethos, understand our vision, understand our practice, understand who we are in our setting and what we need to do with those children. And actually, it's, for me, it's better to homegrown somebody rather than have somebody come in.
Yeah, completely agree. So in terms of sort of being creative with apprentices off the job training, what would that look like to you, Vanessa?
Now you're asking. I think off the job, even listening to our podcast is off the job training, even anything like that. And we have to think outside the box. Because, you know, we get het up about off the job and the fact that they've got to be 20% off the job. Yeah. And it's, you know, when they're included in ratios, that's a bit of a nightmare, a bit of a ball ache sometimes, because it's like, well, actually, they need to go out and they need to be doing off the job. But actually, how great would it be if they listened to something or took an article and read something and thought, well, actually, they're going to deliver it at a staff meeting? Because actually you're home growing them to succeed, and it's, you just got to think, you've got to be creative, haven't you?
Absolutely, yeah, and especially in the situations that most settings are in. So they could do something like, would you suggest they could perhaps read a policy and then put a staff quiz together?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Even put a word search together for the answer would be a great one. Safeguarding quiz, find the safeguarding policy. You know, there are so many platforms out there that you can create word searches that are free. You put the answers in, you write the question. How great is that? What a great you know, when you start a training session or start a training, you know, icebreaker.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and helps to make them feel valued as well, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And actually, they're going to learn something, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's really important that you know, just because we're in early years and the role that we're in doesn't necessarily mean that we know everything. And I always say that every day is a learning day. And if we don't do anything about it, if we don't go away and think, well, what have I learned today? That's a bit of a boring day.
And sometimes we know things, don't we? And with everything else that we've got to do, it gets pushed to the back of our minds. So I guess an apprentice could put something together that brings everybody a fresh perspective on things, and then refreshes everybody's minds on what they've been doing as well.
And it's also making them feel valued, and that's the bit, because actually someone's listening to them. And actually, you've got to remember, staff meetings, they're a nightmare. You know, nobody wants to do one. So make them a little bit exciting. Think of something that can make it, you know, vavavoom it up a bit.
Yeah. Sounds wonderful. One last question, Vanessa. I feel like I picked your brain.
That's fine. No worries.
In terms of when you're interviewing an apprentice, would you have any sort of tips on what that would look like? I mean, I'm guessing that an interview for an apprentice looks very, very different to a qualified practitioner.
Yeah, it would. So, in fact, we just launched our interview cards. I don't even know if I've got any nearby, but interview cards where you have to adapt those questions to actually support the apprentice. Because, you know, bit of advice for apprentices when they go for interviews, one of the questions is, why do you want to work in early years? And the most common answer is, because I love kids and I love working with them. Okay, me, don't use the word kids. They're not baby goats, they're children. Okay, that would be a thing for me. That'd actually be snipped in the bud. I'd be like, let's change that. But also thinking about the way that we word things and asking their opinion. So in saying, instead of just asking a direct question, add the thing, in your opinion, what does play look like? Or in your opinion, or, you know, in your mind, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Rather so that they feel that their opinions valued, so to speak.
yeah,
if you ask just a direct question, like you asking me a direct question is quite, I'm going to say, nobody ever asks me questions very often, but they do. When I do my audits, they do. They have a list of questions. But it's like, you never know what those questions are, do you?
no,
Never
not.
know. No. So actually try and make it a more conversational piece rather than the class of an interview. And even do like you would do a learning walk with the apprentice to show them around. Do the questions as you're going around.
What a great idea.
Why
Yeah,
do you have to do it so that someone sat in front of you or opposite you? Because
yeah,
actually that's going to scare the pants off you.
yeah. That would make them feel a lot more relaxed, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so why there is nothing stated. I mean, obviously, you know, safe recruitment says that you need 2 people, but what it doesn't say that you need to do it in an interview format. Nothing states that. So actually, why can you not do it on something that's a little bit more, oh, this is our baby room, blah, blah, blah. What do you think what do you think a baby room should look like? Can you give us any pointers of where you think that we could, you know, make it look better, or what we could do?
yeah, yeah,
Question.
yeah. Fabulous. Oh, I've got so much information.
I don't know whether I'm nervous or scared or thinking, I'm going to go away and go, oh my goodness me, I have no idea. I answered them. Did I answer them all?
Absolutely, absolutely. I can't wait to listen to this back so that I can actually start writing the answers down, because I've not written anything down. I've just been listening. So
you'll be listening to it going, exactly, which is why I don't listen to it. You'll be listening to it going, I really hate my voice.
yeah,
That's what you'll be doing, I promise you. Okay. Thank you so much for reaching out.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Appreciate it.
No worries. If you are listening to this and have a question for me, please let me know. And maybe we can do what Cathy and I did and just jump on a Zoom, recorded the podcast, recorded the YouTube channel at the same time. And let me know if you have any. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Take good care.